Okay, good. Here we go. To finish, how to die, how to live and how to die well. That's the plan, you know. So we think we'll just do our little refuge prayer to get us going. We're thinking we're going to listen to these teachings so we can take some tools from it, so we can develop our amazing potential, so we can live a good life, so we can die well, so we can get another decent human rebirth, so we can carry on our spiritual path. That's the long-term plan. That's certainly that's the Buddhist approach to death, thinking we're preparing for the next life. It's much more perspective for us. So thinking we're going to listen to these advice so we can do that, exactly that. Sangye chodan soke chognam la janchu baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok sangye chodang soke chognam la janchu baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok Sangye chodang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyabsu chi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog. Thank you, everybody. So, okay, just overview, okay? Using Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, How to Face Death Without Fear, as our basis for this discussion. Like I said, the essence of the advice in Rinpoche's book, of course, coming from the Tibetan Buddhist, and then in particular in the framework of the Vajrayana approach to an explanation of what death is, and the general Buddhist view that, you know, this consciousness of ours came from before and will continue. This is just the fundamental given in all of Buddhist teachings. So then death seen in that framework is very clear that the real thing, like I said, the way to think is, sure, you're preparing for death. That's just this kind of inconvenient kind of thing we have to do, is get rid of this old rubbish body and get another one, because that's due to the karma we have, that our lives are very short. But the real point is we're preparing for the next life. If you think of it this way, it's got a whole different perspective, you know. Like I said about when I use the analogy of me going off on my 9-week editing retreat in Puerto Rico. Of course, I had 9 weeks, so I had to prepare for the day I had to leave the apartment. But if you think about it, the proper way to think is what I was preparing to do was for the next thing I was going to do after I left that apartment. If I just prepared to leave the apartment, you know, and I'd be on this, and then Rita threw me out and closed the door, and then I'd be sitting on the doorstep thinking, where am I going to go next? So clearly, you've got to prepare for where you're going to go next. You've got to buy your air ticket and be ready to go, you know. So here it's exactly the same. And getting used to this idea, certainly if we think we're Buddhist, it really shifts everything, you know, that you're preparing for the next life, because that's the real point. And so all the advice in Rinpoche's book is to help. I mean, of course, it's addressed to how to help our loved ones, but the obvious implication is how to help ourselves as well. You're preparing the person to die well, the ant, the dog, the pussycat, your wife, your mother, to die well so that you can get another decent human rebirth. And why specifically to die well is because it's this technical point, you know, it's very technical, not just overwhelmed by fear, that the way we die, that at the time, no, more precise, at the time of death, and it's quite literally once the death process starts, the second or the third stage of this 8 stages of death, at the point we start to deconstruct, before we lose the plot, particular intense level of grasping kicks in, which is from the 12 links, the 9th link, which is the catalyst for the karmic seed among the billions of karmic seeds in our bank vault. It's the catalyst that triggers the karmic seed that will determine our next life. It's quite precise and quite technical, you know. So knowing about this, like knowing anything, calms you down and stops you from having fear. Therefore, you learn to prepare for that. So the way to prepare for that is to die peacefully. So how to die peacefully is to have the mind to be virtuous. How to have the mind to be virtuous is to live a good life. 90% of the battle is living a good life. You don't just wait for death to come. You've got to prepare for it. And how you prepare for it is nothing cosmic. You prepare for it by living a good life, which means a life within the framework of knowing you're impermanent. And therefore, given that you're impermanent and having the Buddhist view of your consciousness coming from before and continuing after, the implication is, given that you could die today, then how do you want to live? Because you want to make sure you've got a decent karmic seed to trigger at the time of death. So that means to live a good life, live in vows, do your purification every day, do your practice every day, then guarantee your life will be relaxing, your life will be good, you'll be confident, and when death comes, it won't be a surprise, and you'll be able to die and say, bye-bye, folks, I'm out of here, I'll see you next life. I mean, it's kind of logical, but we've got to confront it and look at it and think about it and study it and then put it into practice. That's it, as we talked the last 2 days. So I think before we go further, I really want to know if there are any more questions, because we didn't have that many questions. I mean, usually there's masses of questions about this, about your animals or what you should do, about suicide, blah, 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 all these things. So we'll continue. I want to finish it. We've done the essence of it all, really. We've covered it all, the main points. But I want to go into more detail about what a Pure Land is, and perhaps mention some of the, we haven't gone to much detail about individual practices. They're all in Lama Zopa's book. It's more the attitude and the approach to it and the general idea, So before we get into any more, I'd like to know if there are any questions that have come up from yesterday for any of you. I'd like to know if there are questions, any kind at all, that have come up. If not, that's perfectly fine. Yes, Helen. Hello, sweetheart.
So my question is, how does one overcome the negative karma of euthanasia of a pet?
Sweetheart, it's okay. I mean, we're human. We're not Buddhas yet. We've all done dumb things. We've all, we meant well, didn't we, when we killed our cat? I know euthanasia, we use all these polite Greek words. It's called killing. It's okay. It's all right. Nothing wrong, Helen. Don't worry about it. Most people in the bloody West kill their pets. I mean, that's how poor old veterinarians these days, I'm sure they spend half their time killing pets. It's most unfortunate, but this is the way the world is now. So let's just look at it, okay? Let's look at it, Helen. So first of all, the key thing is the karma we create, the actions we do, the quality, I'll spell it out precisely. Mm-hmm. The character. Okay, first of all, every millisecond of what we think and do and say is sowing a seed in our mind. It's the best analogy. We sow seeds in our mind. And so those seeds are either negative or positive, sweetheart. And there's a spectrum clearly of negative and positive. It's not some absolute thing, I mean, and the key factor, and I'm going to spell it out precisely, the key factor that determines the character of the actions we create second by second, that is to say, the key factor that determines whether it's a so-called negative or positive action, and then indeed the intensity of that negative or positive, the key factor is the motivation behind it. So, honey child, I'm sure when you killed your precious pet, you weren't full of anger and rage and want to make your pet miserable. We all do it out of compassion, don't we? Do you agree with that, Helen? Now, yes. But listen to this, darling. As His Holiness says, the Dalai Lama, compassion is not enough. As Lama Zopa puts it, meaning well is not enough. It's obvious. We need wisdom. So the wisdom in this case is wisdom most of us don't have, Helen. It's the wisdom that can say with confidence that when you killed your pussycat, that at that time of death for your pussycat, the karmic seed that was triggered when it started to die was a positive one, which would guarantee it would get another decent human life and keep on moving on a little spiritual path. You can't say that with certainty, can you?
No,
and most
that we don't
that.
know.
That's right, darling. So none of us have that level. Well, some of us do. If we're clairvoyant, we will have that level of wisdom. But I mean, we all mean well. But of course, meaning well is not enough. And I always use a simple example. Let's say I've got a headache and you've got a pill to help me and you've got so much compassion. Robina, I've got this pill and it's such a great pill, but you forget whether it's cyanide or aspirin and you give me the wrong pill. Well, I will thank you for keeping your pills to yourself. Mind your own business, Helen. In other words, if we don't have certainty, darling, of the consequences of our actions, then it's obvious we're not going to play Russian roulette, So, I mean, this is a really shocking point because, of course, 99% of us in the world, even if we're Buddhist, we still think, well, I mean, we meant well. Our poor pussy was suffering. The little dog had cancer. How can you bear that suffering? But that's not the main issue. And this is the Buddhist one, which really takes us time to think about is that once your grandmother or your dog, their mind starts to leave the body, it's determined by what karmic seed was triggered. And if your poor grandmother or your poor dog was in incredible fear and panic at the time they died, and you can't guarantee that they weren't, just because you were compassionate doesn't mean your dog or your grandma were feeling happy. That's the key point. Then if we can't be certain, then we really need to think of other things to do. And you see, this brings us to the other main point because of this, that mostly we have to look very carefully at that we can't stand to see the suffering. Yes, the suffering is awful, either our grandmother or the pussycat, but we tend to think, oh my God, that suffering is so shocking. We must we must kill it right now. But half the time it's our own panic, it's our own fear, and it's our own lack of clarity about how to help our pussycat or the dog. I mean, there's lots of ways of alleviating pain, and very often, with great respect to us, Helen, and I have no idea if this is you or not, it starts getting very damned inconvenient to be spending thousands of dollars on the medical care for your pussycat because it costs so much money, and many times people just can't handle it. So we sort of, okay, well, knock our little cat off. I'm not saying you did that, but it becomes a problem. So, we've got to take responsibility, So the thing is, there are many ways of helping a person die, including a cat, that can make it good for the cat and make it peaceful, and the dog as well. There's lots of things we can do. So we need to have less fear and more courage. And it's not a fundamentalist point, or you're not supposed to kill. It's simply a question of not having the wisdom to be certain what the consequences of our action would be. And even if we don't put our little pussycat down, and even if and we give the pussycat medicine and give it painkillers, it doesn't guarantee the pussycat will get a very good life, but at least it's protecting our karma from killing our pussycat. It's a very nuanced point, and to think about it carefully. The bottom line is try not to have any being suffer, but we've got to realize that suffering is part of life, and sometimes we just cannot avoid suffering. So we do everything we can to help our pussycat be happy. And the thing is, like, especially with your dog, the dogs adore their owners. So, often you see, this is something else I think even with humans, we don't think about. But I think often the suffering, we don't distinguish between the mental suffering, the mental anguish, and the physical pain. We tend to think they're the same. So we drug our grandmother out, but her poor little mind might be still very anxious. Whereas if you're loving and kind to your grandmother, make her feel safe, make her feel secure, even if she's got physical pain, mentally she might be more relaxed. We've got to distinguish between the mental and the physical. The same with your dog. Your dog adores you. It relies on you totally. If you're taking care of your dog and making it feel comfortable, giving it painkillers, it's okay, maybe, we've got to really think about it, Helen. So anyway, in general, as you might know, as a Buddhist practitioner, you have this practice that we do every day. We call it purification. We're all human. We all do dumb things. So if every day we do the purification practice, we regret the action we've done to harm sentient beings because we don't want the future suffering for ourselves. That's important. Then we have compassion and we do the practice and we make a decision to try not to do it again. So there's no karma we can't purify, Helen. It's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Good, darling. Thank you so much. Yeah, Hillary, you have a question.
Yes, Venerable, thank you.
Yes.
Besides the handbook or the book that you're referring to,
Yeah.
Lama Zopa, is there some very concise and specific information that we can leave for our loved ones in our important papers, when we are unable to, give the instruction at our time of death?
Of course, yeah, and the only way to do that, Hillary, is to understand the essence of the advice in this book. So the essence of the advice in this book, if you want to tell your family how to take care of you when you're sick and dying, put me in a most conducive environment, make my room beautiful and peaceful. Don't have rabbiting on and rubbish and nonsense and pets and gossip and drama in my room. Keep it very peaceful. Play these particular prayers, put these particular pictures and practices. When I stop breathing, do not touch me for 3 days. You give the basic instructions as a series of bullet points, but you have to understand them yourself first. Then the essence of it is really clear once you understand it, of course, darling. And people are happy to do. Hospitals too are happy to do people's wishes, It's really kind of fundamental points. Don't disturb you. Make you as peaceful as possible. Play mantras if I'm unconscious. Don't have noise and rabbiting on in the room, please. You understand? Ideally, leave my body for 3 days if you can and play mantras and prayers. Write to this monastery and get them to do these prayers and these practices. And then when you cremate me, keep some of the next practice. And we're going to talk about this today now, some of the practices to do after you're dead. I'll go into these in a minute. But one of the really brilliant practices is to you get this particular practice called Jangwa, that purifies your ashes, and then you can have tsatsas made with your ashes in it. There's all sorts of things you can do to help the person once they've died. There's not that many, there's a half a dozen things you can very clearly give them instructions, with addresses and email addresses. It's not that complicated, but you need to understand it clearly yourself. Do you understand?
I do.
Good, Hilary.
Thank you.
Yes, Kathleen, and then Olive.
Hi, Venerable. Thank you for your teachings. I have a few questions. Yesterday you mentioned, and I think you just mentioned it today, to do not touch the body. And that I just want to confirm that that is after the person has stopped breathing.
Well, ideally, the point is this, the general point is this. As a person, people like Kate who work with the dying can see this. And generally in relation to the Buddhist explanation of the way the mind gets from the grosser level to the more subtle to the very subtle. In general, we can even see when a person's very sick even, they're very fragile. Their mind is fragile, isn't it? Because the body is getting weaker. And when the body is getting weaker, the mind and the body are beginning to separate, if you can think of it like that. And so one of the crucial things is evident is when you're starting to really, you're sicker and sicker and getting towards death, even then, even any noise is really distracting, touching the body and moving things. So it's as much as possible, including the physical contact, to let the person be peaceful and calm and not disturb. So even just a person might mean well and grab the hand of their grandmother, and their poor grandma's really fragile, it can be a shock to the system. So it's got to be, everything you do has got to be quiet, gentle, extraordinarily so, especially as they're actually going through the death process. And then, of course, once they've stopped breathing, if the subtle mind is still in the body, which is more than likely, sometimes the mind can leave immediately, but not always, especially if the person dies peacefully, then that can also be really disturbing. It can shock the mind because they can still be conscious at a subtle level. So the general point to understand behind that. Holding your grandmother's hand while you're talking to her and she's dying, that's very wonderful and comforting. It's just to understand the purpose behind it, is to not disturb the person, Do you understand?
Yes, thank you.
Because the energy for even when if you're old, your loved one is there and you're very sick and you're weak, just the energy to even have to say hello to somebody can be really quite exhausting, So it's to really, really, I keep always saying it like this, it's like a joke, it's ridiculous, but this is the dead person's gig. Everything in that room should be for the benefit of that dying person. Nothing to do with our grief or nothing to do with everybody else. Keep your emotions out of the room. Everything should be for the benefit of the dying person. Peaceful, quiet, the right sounds that they want if they're spiritual, not to touch it unnecessary, all these kinds of things. Absolutely keeping our emotions out of the way and grabbing and holding and hugging and kissing and that kind of thing. Do you understand?
Yes, thank you.
And understand the reason behind it, not to be neurotic, not to be superstitious about it. Do you understand, Kathleen?
I do. Thank you. My other question is from something that I read in the materials that you provided in the link, and I think it was from Lama Zopa Rinpoche's writing. When somebody's dying and a non-virtuous thoughts are triggered, that
at the time of death, yes.
At the time of death, that they can do five things can possibly manifest, like arms thrashing, legs thrashing, screaming.
That's right, exactly. Yeah.
Blood coming out. Is there anything that a person can do to help the person at that time if one of these five things are manifesting when they're dying?
I understand, Kathleen. No, I understand. In general, in other words, I hear, there's a friend of mine who sleeps with the dying, helps the dying. She's in Australia, she's a nun, and she talked to one example of one man who she was just sitting with, and it was like as he was getting closer to death, he became absolutely like out of his brain with fear, slashing, smashing, eyes looking like he was like kind of red and shocking, like he was seeing some hideous kind of vision. And this is an indication that a negative seed was triggered, which means indicating as he's dying, he's seeing his future suffering life. This is not uncommon, apparently. I mean, Kate says her experience is most people die peacefully. That's pretty amazing. And that's because probably they've got a peaceful environment. But it can be that the negative seeds triggered. And so a negative seed is triggered because the mind is distressed. Their person's distressed. So in his case, he then calmed down. He did calm. She was just continued to help him by saying mantras. Nothing much you can do. I mean, if you're completely out of your brain, let's say, in daily life even, and you're completely hallucinating and you completely believe the world is coming at you, don't matter how many times I hold your hand and tell you everything's wonderful, we believe our own karmic appearances. We believe the mental suffering. Look at what people are having a mental breakdown. Do you understand what I'm saying? When a person's having a panic attack, for example, in daily life, you can tell them everything's okay, but then because we're so overwhelmed by the suffering, nothing can help us much. Do you understand what I'm saying, Kathleen? So in the same at the time of death, but all you can do is be calm and help and say mantras and whatever. So that's what she continued to do. And then he calmed down. And then he died peacefully. So then she asked one of her teachers what happened there. Well, she said he kind of, some negative karma was triggered. And by having it, he purified, and then he calmed down, and then he had a very peaceful death. So, and Lama Zopa mentioned this as well. So all you can do is just stay steady. Like a person's having a panic attack. They're having a panic attack, basically. All you can do is be there like a rock of Gibraltar, continue to say mantra and be steady, not to freak them out, not to take it, not to try and hold them. I mean, just try and be there as like a rock of Gibraltar, I would say. Do you understand? By saying mantra to help bless their mind. Your little dog as well. The dog as well, your pussycat as well, you know. Yeah. Thanks, Kathleen.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, good, darling. Yes, Olive.
Hi. I just wanted to say, to the best of my knowledge, FPMT centers are advised to have these kind of death kits, and they have some like information. Can you hear me okay? Am I off mute?
I can, Olive, yes.
And they have cards that you place on like the deceased person and stuff,
right,
and
exactly.
each member center is meant to have one. So I just wanted to speak to someone who was asking before about leaving a will or something, that you could probably put it that you'd like someone to contact your Dharma center, and they should apparently have one.
All that should be part of it. Yeah, I mean, that's right, exactly. Yeah, I know Lama Zopa talks about it in his book. He's put together a little, like a little container. It's got a little stupa in it. It's got a blessing string. It's got the mantras. I didn't mention all this. Thank you very much for mentioning. And that's very handy to have. And that's certainly, if you want to give instructions, that will be part of the deal. You give this with the instructions. Put the stupa on my crown. Put the mantra on my chest. Absolutely. Yes, all of these things. And it's all in the book there. Thank you, Oliver. That's very helpful. Thank you, darling. So what else, people? Anybody else?
Venerable Robina, there's an anonymous question in chat.
Yes.
Can you please talk about miscarriage, stillborn, and infant death SIDS? What happens in those situations? Karma seed ?
So say the examples again.
Can you please talk about miscarriage?
Miscarriage, yeah, stillborn, and what was the other one?
Infant death. It's called SIDS.
Oh yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That's a very interesting one, that one. Okay, yes, of course, for sure. Like, well, there's many things in that question. I'm not quite sure how much the person wants me to talk about, but let's say, you know, in the case, like, I'll use my example. I had an abortion, right? I had an abortion when I was 23. So it's always helpful to just use an example. I'm happy to use my example. There I was in London. I was a hippie. It was in 1967, and I'd just arrived in London. And I remember I felt fortunate because the National Health in England had just made abortions legal. This is in 1967. So I felt very fortunate. I could go to the hospital. I got a free abortion. They were all very kind at the hospital. So let's look at it from the Buddhist point of view, and let's look at it from the point of view of the fetus. So there's this human being who, you know, it was about 12 weeks, I think, when I had the abortion. So there I mean, I don't want to give too much information, but I try to joke about it, not joke about it. But there I was this hippie girl, and I did what hippies did, and I had this boyfriend. And I remember I always remember he was an Australian fellow. And anyway, never mind. I did what I did, you know. I remember it vivid. But this is what's interesting point. This is also something interesting. People I find this, maybe it embarrasses people, but I don't want to embarrass you. But this also is interesting about when does the consciousness enter into the egg and sperm. The Buddhist view is in general when the egg and sperm come together. So this is a good example. And I've met many women, I don't know about men, who also say they had this experience. I know when I was with that boy back then in 1967, when I was 23, however old I was, yes. I remember vividly that second I said to myself, oh God, I'm pregnant. I knew that second that, I mean, using these words now, I didn't use those words then, that a consciousness had entered into my body. It was crystal clear. And even a friend of mine, this is very fascinating, recently, a friend of mine, her daughter was staying with her, the daughter and the husband, because their house was getting renovated. And so the daughter came down for breakfast one morning and said, oh, Mum, I'm pregnant. And then the mother said, well, when did you find out? She said, 20 minutes ago. In other words, the woman, the daughter, that second, having sex with her husband, she knew a consciousness had gone into her body. I don't know if some of you women have had this experience, but that fits exactly with the Buddha's view that that's when conception is, generally speaking, when the egg and sperm come together. The consciousness runs like a magnet and joins the egg and sperm. So that's an interesting experience. So I had that experience. So I knew immediately I was pregnant. But what was interesting at the time, I mean, I'd been a Catholic, right? But I'd given up being a Catholic. I'd given up God and was into I decided, goodbye, God, hello, boys. You know, I was into a new experience. I was a hippie. And so I remember thinking, I didn't ever think of it as anything. I never thought of it as a soul. I just knew the quote unquote, I was pregnant. And I knew I didn't want a baby. You know, I didn't think it through. I wasn't being very logical. I just knew I didn't want a baby. So I felt quote unquote fortunate that I could go to the hospital without a hassle and get a free abortion. But what was interesting, I mean, so okay, what's the story? So this sentient being who'd been in a body a few weeks before that, had died, and then the condition of me and this boy in bed became the catalyst for this person for whom the karma had already. This is what's fascinating about karma. A few weeks before, the person who came to my womb was in another body, and at the time of their death, this is how karma is so fascinating. At the time of their death, the karmic seed to get a human body, to get my human womb, was already triggered. So this is how karma works. The karma between us was already there. I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't met this boy before. It was only 7 weeks later that I met the boy and jumped into bed. So this person had the karma to come to my womb, which means we had this intense karmic connection, So then this person comes to my womb, then I quote unquote get pregnant, then I decide no way in the world do I want an abortion. And this is what's also fascinating. Because it's an interdependent scenario between me and that consciousness. I mean, the boy never knew about it. I never saw him again. Nothing to do with him, He never knew. It was me and this consciousness. They came to my womb. It was so intense. You think about it. But the thought was crystal clear. I want an abortion. So that means that consciousness, they had the karma to be killed by me. They had the karma to come to my womb on the one hand, but they had the other kind of karma called experiences similar to the cause to be aborted by me. So there's no way in the world I would have even had the thought to have an abortion if that person in my womb didn't have the karma to be aborted. This is the interdependence of these relationships. It's very fascinating. And then the karma for that person in my womb to get killed must have been very strong because there was no hindrance. I went to the hospital, they approved, I got the abortion, they did it, and then boom, But I remember it was interesting. This is an added point. They didn't get the fetus out properly. They mangled it so that I had to have another D&C. So can you imagine the poor suffering of this consciousness, this being in my body got mangled on the way out, then had to be scraped out again. And I also remember, I never thought of it as killing anybody. I never thought like that. My motivation was obviously just self-centered. I wasn't trying to be aggressive or angry. It was no compassion there. But I remember I got really depressed. But I didn't understand why. I was very curious. But the hospital was so kind to me. They gave me because it's the national health, it was free. I got a private room for like another week just to kind of recuperate. The nurses were so kind. I'm just giving you details and how karma works. So there was this karma between me and this consciousness, this being, and they got killed by me, due to karma. I mean, we've got this karmic connection from many lives in the past. I'd kill them, they'd kill me, blah, 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 just talking about it. But equally, another example I've got, I'm coming to the point of the direct answer to the question. Part of this is helpful. Part of this is part of it. A friend of mine, I met a man years ago in New Zealand who told me, he was about 40, he said that out of the blue, suddenly his mother told him one day that at the time she had decided to have an abortion. with him. She was in the hospital. Everything was agreed. It was signed. She was in her nightie, ready to go to get the operation. She was walking to one other room or another. She had her hand on the handle of the door, and she changed her mind. And this man was so moved by this that suddenly his mother decided not to abort him. But that's due to his karma, that he didn't get killed. So things are so interdependent, and this is very powerful for women, because women often feel totally guilty, totally responsible, but it's an interdependent scenario with that fetus as much as it is with you. You've got this karma with that fetus, and the karma of the fetus very much depends on what you do, and what you do depends on their karma as well. In other words, again, I will say it, there's no way in the world I would have even thought to have an abortion, or I might have tried to have an abortion, but it was not successful if the sentient being in my womb didn't have the karma to die. This other man, his mother changed her mind. That was due to the fact that he didn't have the karma to get killed. Things are very interdependent. It's very fascinating. So, okay, the other aspect is this. There are 4 ways that our karma ripens. So one, for that being, I don't know if it was a girl or a boy, I have no idea, who came to my womb, that being, that sentient being, one had the karma to be born a human, which is the first way karma ripens, the type of rebirth you get. And that was the fruit of their past non-killing. We've got thousands of karmic seeds in our mind. But number 2, that the second way your karma ripens is as a tendency to do an action or not do it, when that person never have a chance to do that because they didn't get born. But the third karma ripened for them, which is called the experience similar to the cause. And in this case, it was the experience similar to the cause of one of their killing past actions, such that they got killed, in this case by me, and they died young. So the karmic result, called experience similar to the cause of a past action of, let's say, killing, is you die young or you get killed. Well, in this case, for the fetus in my womb, it was both. They died before they were even born, or a baby who gets aborted. The added addition, the addition there is that I killed them, and I requested the doctors and nurses to do it, so that makes the karma quite heavy. But second, the miscarriage is simply the child's karma ran out. The mother didn't kill them. Their life ran out even before they got born. So they just died young. So that's called the experience similar to the cause of past killing. Your life ends not sooner than usual, and you get killed. That's called experiences similar to the cause of past killing. And so, look at all the miscarriages and look at the millions of abortions. I wouldn't be surprised on our planet among humans that more human beings get killed or die young before they're even born than those that actually get born. I don't think we do surveys of how many abortions or miscarriages there are. Maybe that survey has been done, but that's due to the karma of that sentient being, It's due to the karma of the sentient being in the womb. This is the way it is. So the SIDS one, I think that's very fascinating. I mean, the Buddhist view have an explanation. This certainly doesn't fit with the materialist view, that, there's a type of being called spirits. We mentioned it very briefly. And like, for example, in this world, many people hear voices. People see visions of beings. These are called spirits. They, in fact, are called spirits. And they interfere and they harm us. This is very common among the Buddhist view of reality. So people who hear voices, they're possessed by spirits, quite literally. Yeah, they are. You are hearing voices. People have taken over your body. So one other way that spirits harm, some of the spirits are very suffering beings. They could also harm beings like babies. Often they can harm animals, or they harm very fragile beings like a little baby. So a common explanation among Buddhists is that spirits literally have killed that child, have harmed that child. But it's so tragic because the mothers often get accused of murder, And spirits harming you is not an uncommon thing among the Buddhist understanding. And many people have experience. I mean, I had one experience ever when I was living at one of our centers in England years ago. I woke up very suddenly in the middle of the night, crystal clear that a being had come in the window, and then they laid down on top of me and suffocated me. This could be very common for animals or babies, but because I was a grown-up, I said a mantra. So they just went away. They walked out the door. This is not an uncommon experience, and I bet some of you have had things like this. They call it spirit interference. Tibetan doctors can even tell if some of the sicknesses we have are caused by interference from spirits. This is not an uncommon thing among Buddhists. So I would say some of those we call them cot deaths in Australia, crib deaths, little being has karma, or their karma just runs out, they die, or they can be harmed by spirits and therefore basically get killed by these disembodied beings. That's an explanation in Buddhism, certainly Tibetan Buddhism. So I hope that answers some of your questions. Any other questions? I'm sorry to cough all the time. Any other questions, please, people? Any other questions of any kind at all? I mean, all I can do is give you the Buddhist answers, isn't it? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's up to you to decide. I only can learn what I've learned from my Buddhist teachers, and thinking about these things. Are there any other questions? No. Okay. Nothing there, Mary. Okay. Well, let's look at some of the practices we can do that are really helpful from Lama Zopa's point of view, therefore the Vajrayana point of view, therefore the Buddhist point of view, to help the person not just while they're still sick, not just when they die. And this is the point about the Buddhist approach. Many of the practices in Lama Zopa's book are to help the person before they die, but to also help them when at the time of death, to help them navigate that process, like we talked, to ensure that they're virtuous and peaceful and that a virtuous karmic seed is triggered. And then it's really important to help them in those next 3 days by doing practices and all those kinds of things that can help their mind. And then, not only that, but once their mind leaves the body, there are lots of practices you can continue to do for the next, weeks, and there's a long list of all these practices. So one of the things that is really excellent, Lama Zopa talks about it, I mentioned briefly, it's a practice called, because basically, we like, what do you call those places where you bury people? What are they called? What do we call where you bury people?
A cemetery. A cemetery.
I forget. Where you bury people. What's it called? It's a really popular, simple word.
Cemetery.
I can't hear you, Mary. You're floating. Cemeteries, for God's sake. A cemetery. Thank you. It's old age. You lose words, My grandmother, when I was about 11, and she kept forgetting words. I always told her off. Oh, Nanny, you forget words. She said, when you get older, you'll forget words. I said, no, I won't. Well, yes, I do. Anyway, cemetery. So, we either like to go, because we remember our loved ones, so we go to the cemetery. Or if we burn our loved one, we like to keep their ashes. But as Lama Zopa says, there's no benefit. It's just attachment, with respect. There's no virtue. There's no virtuous actions in merely going to a cemetery and leaving flowers, or having your loved one's ashes in a canister on your mantelpiece. He says there are things you can do to make it very much more powerful. And this, of course, again, is according to the Buddhist approach. And so one practice is called jangwa. And usually it's best, it's not in the book, it's a very long practice. And it's better to get a qualified person like a lama or a monastery to do it for you. So you'd save, if you let's say you bury your loved one, you'd save a little bit of their hair or their nails, or if you burn them, you save just some of the ashes, and then you could have these ashes or the remains blessed in this jangwa ceremony. It's a very long, and it blesses them and invokes the presence of all the holy beings, all the Buddhas, to be in those ashes. And so then literally, as Lama Zopa says in the book, these remains, these ashes become like a holy object. So then what you can do is either, let's say, you can scatter them in the water, and all the fishes in the water get blessed because you've blessed these ashes. You can scatter them to the wind, or a lovely practice is you have these little images. They call them tsatsas. They're little kind of very small bas-relief Buddhist images they're made out of plaster, and you can ask a monastery to do it, or you can learn to do it yourself, and you mix some of the ashes with these little images, and then instead of having a canister on your mantelpiece of ashes of your loved one, you have these little Buddha images, and your loved one's ashes are mixed with that. So and it's a very, and when you see it, it lifts your heart. You see a little Buddha image, and your loved one's ashes are mixed with that. It's very kind of sweet, better than seeing a canister, I think, less sinister, and then it's like, and you can give one to all the different family. It's a lovely thing to do. It's very nice. And so that's really then makes it so, there's so much virtue, there's so much benefit, Lama Zopa says, both for us and for the loved one. So that's a really nice practice to do. It's all in the book. You can read about it. And there's a list in the book too of all the different monasteries that do this. So you can, get the instructions of what to do. And of course, I didn't mention that liberation box, Lama Zopa calls it, or as Olive called it, the death kit. That's a death kit, whatever you want to call it. It's got little things in there like a blessing string, a stupa you can use for the crown, a little text, different, little card of very special mantras. Rinpoche says are so blessed that you can put on the heart chakra or the crown of your loved one. All of this is in the book, So the other thing you can do as well, there's lots of other practices you can do for your loved one once they've died. And this is very common in the Tibetan tradition. You might do things for like 49 days. And that 49 days is this period that it's said that the consciousness can be in the intermediate state. They might well leave sooner, but it's usually not said to be later than that. And this again is all, as Sarah's question yesterday, this is all coming from the experience of the great yogis and from all the texts, So there's many practices like make sure you use your loved one's money to do something really virtuous, like use the money to make Buddhist practices, Buddhist books, use it for charities, give it away. Your loved one gets the merit of that. It's really important for them, So there's many things in the book that you can do. Have the monasteries do practices. Your own self as a group of people can do practices. You can meet once a week or once a day. It's up to you, to do things to help your loved one's consciousness. Because Lama Zopa talks about different scenarios. The ideal scenario when you die, as I've been talking, is that at the time of death, you die virtuously and therefore peacefully. That triggers a virtuous karmic seed. It programs you to take another human body or a pure land, which I will talk about in a minute. So that's the ideal scenario. And then, you leave the body quietly and you do lots of practices and prayers and that supports them. Then you have the funeral and then, blah, blah, blah. And that's the best one. But the other scenario could be that maybe something changes. Like, let's say, for example, that person giving their organs and they're aware of what's happening with their subtle consciousness. The example I mentioned from that book I quoted. And this woman's heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. So based on the Buddhist understanding, I'm deducing that her subtle mind was aware of what was going on when she saw the circular saw coming to cut her open. And so that could disturb her mind hugely. And that could then change the karma that was already triggered, a virtuous karmic seed, to become a non-virtuous. Her mind might have left the body immediately then, based on the shock, and that could have been then causing her to get a suffering rebirth. But there are things you can do to help reverse that. Rinpoche's got all this in the book, And the other thing that's interesting also, by the way, about organs, I remember asking Rinpoche, that's in the book, is it possible that after your loved one's organs have been cut out, is it possible that still the mind might still be there? And he said, yes, it is possible, depending on the operation, depending on the procedure. So this is why in the instructions in the book, after each of the scenarios, if your loved one dies at home, if your loved one dies in hospital, if your loved one gives their organs, always the one is you do no matter what, after, let's say in the organ one, you get the body back from the hospital, it's all been cut open and they've taken their organs, you would still, check up and do this, check up to see if the mind is there and, press or pull on their crown chakra to help the consciousness leave. Because there's many possibilities. And the other scenario, which I forgot to mention yesterday, was what if your loved one dies suddenly? Well, it's all a question of the karma, what their mind is doing at that moment, That's where the ideal scenario is not to die suddenly. The ideal scenario is to be ready for death, to be sick or old and get time to be ready for death. I mean, most of us, if we live our lives really well, then we will be ready for death, But most of us aren't such advanced practitioners and we can get angry easily and upset easily. So it's best to die slowly and be ready for it. This is the main thing. But if your loved one dies suddenly, from the point of view of the helpers, usually we have a complete panic attack and freak out, don't we? And we I use that example of my friend Paul in California, in Santa Cruz, who had a heart attack. And he'd asked his wife not to call the hospital, the ambulance, but she panicked and she did. He wanted just to die peacefully, So then we had to go to the hospital, and like I told you the story. So, you have, the main thing is, like anything, if you're trained to do something, you'll know how to do it and you won't lose the plot. But if, if a person suddenly collapses on the ground and you know how to do whatever has to be done to see if they're really alive or you can resuscitate them, then please do it. But you don't lose the plot. But meanwhile, if you're going to be doing that, also you'd be saying mantras in the person's ear in case they don't come back to life. And then at least that can help them at that time. But in every case, you need to have your wits about you. It's like any education, you need it in advance, and that will prepare you for these scenarios, you know. Because all the time, the point is, and this is hard for us, is to keep remembering everything here that we're doing is for the sake of the mind of the person who is dying or who has died. Everything is here is for their benefit. Deal with our own grief, deal with our own loss. That's a different discussion. That's another book. It's not this book. This is the key thing to remember, you know. So now let's talk about Pure Lands. What on earth are Pure Lands, you know? Well, I've got to give a bit of background to this to understand the Buddhist view, you know. And this is, I mean, okay. So in general, there are the different realms of existence within samsara that Buddhism describes. And we discussed, you know, God realms, humans, animals, spirits, hell beings, this whole spectrum of mental experiences all the way from joy to suffering that come along with a certain level of physicality, all of which are created by our own selves, all of which are the fruit of our own past actions. Like in Buddhism, as I keep saying all the time, there's no creator, there's no punisher, there's no rewarder. We create our own experiences, including our own lives, you know. So, okay. So in general, that's for ordinary beings who haven't got high realizations. But so then that's one point. Now, okay, let's look at what a Buddha is. The word Buddha refers to the person who and utterly of all delusions and developing to perfection all the goodness, speaking very simply. So then a Buddha mind is a pretty outrageous being. They're completely, you know, a Buddha mind is not physical. When you've accomplished Buddhahood, your consciousness, your mind is no longer physical. You don't need bodies anymore. You've gone way past all the need for bodies, you know. So your mind is not physical. It pervades the universe. It has infinite wisdom, infinite power, infinite compassion. And the key thing is, because what drives a person to become a Buddha is incredible compassion. So when you get to the point of being a Buddha and you no longer need bodies or lifetimes or rebirths, then you don't want to just hang out in bliss. You want to be reborn in bodies consciously for the sake of sentient beings. So there's two main kinds of bodies you can take. A body of an ordinary person, like a human or an animal or whatever, because you've got complete control, you're kind of like play acting. You're not really a human because you've gone beyond the karma of needing to be a human. You might manifest as a dog, but you're not really a dog. You just manifest in a dog body for the sake of sentient beings because your mind is enlightened. So I always remember this lovely story. I'm getting to the Pure Lands, okay? This lovely story about His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You speak to any Tibetan and they will tell you the Dalai Lama is a Buddha. Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not clairvoyant. I can't tell. Most of us can't tell. We're not Buddhas ourselves. So, you know, we have confidence he's a Buddha. That's good. But the point is about a Buddha. As I said, one of the things they've gone beyond the need to have bodies or rebirths, but out of their incredible compassion, one of their actions is spontaneously taking rebirths in countless bodies. I mean, not just one, but countless bodies in different realms of existence for the sake of suffering sentient beings. And they're doing this all the time. I mean, it sounds like science fiction to us. So there's this marvelous story about His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I remember Lama Zopa told this story. So this is in the early 1960s, a couple of years after the Tibetans had come into exile. And of course, the Tibetans, His Holiness and all the high lamas, were really kind of focused on getting land in India so they can carry on their monasteries, so they can carry on the lineages of all the practices before the whole damn thing died out, you know. So there was all this negotiating with the Indian government. The Indian government was so kind to the Tibetans, allowed them in, you know, and I mean, India's a poor country, but they were so compassionate to allow the Tibetans in. So there was all this negotiating between the Indian government and the Tibetan government in exile, which is His Holiness up in Dharamsala in northern India. about these hundreds of thousands of acres of forest land in the south of India, which is where now it's like little Tibet. There are hundreds of monasteries, hundreds of thousands of Tibetans living there. So there's all this negotiating about getting this land for the Tibetans. This is the early 60s, for the Tibetans to get this land to build their monasteries and carry on their lineages, you know. So at one point, the story is something like this. The Tibetan minister sent down to Delhi. Delhi is where all the government offices are. It's about a 12-hour train journey from the mountains. I mean, Dharamsala was where the Dalai Lama was sent and was offered land because it's up in the mountains. It's cool, you know. It's where all the when the British started coming, they'd go off into the mountains in the hot rainy season, in the summer when it's like 100 degrees every day. And that would be there. They'd spend their summers and they'd come down then to the government offices again in Delhi. So this is where the Dalai Lama was based and the Tibetan government was based in exile. So this Tibetan minister was sent down by His Holiness to the government office in Delhi this particular time to have a meeting with this Indian government minister. Well, whatever happened, the bureaucracy or whatever, he couldn't get a meeting and he was really upset, and he went back up to Dharamsala and he complained to His Holiness, it was impossible, I couldn't get a meeting. And His Holiness said something like, it's okay, it'll be fine, go back down to Delhi right now. So he hopped into his taxi, went down to Pathankot, got the train overnight, 12 hours, got down to the office. And so in the office that particular day, he was waiting for his meeting with the Indian minister. The Indian minister's little boy was in the office with his daddy. So that he was talking to the Tibetan minister, and the little boy expressed the wish for a dog. So the Tibetan minister was very happy to do something to help, you know. I'll get you a dog. So he went outside and there was a sadhu, a holy man, who had a little dog. So the Tibetan said, can I buy your dog? So he bought the dog from the sadhu. And he offered the little dog to the little boy. Well, the little boy was very happy and he ran into his daddy, and daddy was happy, everybody was happy. And so the meeting happened and all the wheels were greased, you know. Well, as Lama Zopa, who told the story, said, the dog and the sadhu were manifestations of the Dalai Lama's mind. Because these dudes, these Buddhas, I know it's like science fiction for us. I mean, the lowest level bodhisattva, and there are 10 levels of bodhisattvas, 10 stages of your spiritual development that finally culminates in your becoming a Buddha. Even the lowest level bodhisattva can manifest their own mind in 100 forms simultaneously in the various realms of existence for the sake of sentient beings. I mean, this is pretty outrageous, you know. So Buddha's just some nice person sitting there looking holy. The Dalai Lama, we see this nice human being, okay? Millions of people love the Dalai Lama. Of course, millions of people hate him as well. The Chinese can't stand the sight of him, the Chinese communists. But he looks like he's a Buddha. But you can't tell. He's a nice human being with a Tibetan face, a Tibetan body, you know. He's a nice person. But who knows he's a Buddha? Because the reality is we're not clairvoyant. A person who is a Buddha, by definition, doesn't need a body. So by definition, you can't see who a Buddha is. It's pretty logical. So therefore, these Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are continually manifesting around the world in ordinary bodies for the sake of others, not just humans, as hell beings, as spirits, as ants, as dogs. So this is the point. So the Dalai Lama, we see him and go, oh, he's a Buddha. Well, don't be ridiculous. You don't know that. You can have faith he is, it's good. But he's basically, if he is a Buddha, his Buddha mind chose, due to the karma he has with these Tibetan people, to manifest as a human man, a Tibetan man. So he looks like a human, he acts like a human, he looks like a Tibetan, but if he's a Buddha, he's like pretend he's play acting as a human. He's not technically a human, because a human is the result of karma, and a Buddha's finished their karma. So this Dalai Lama then manifesting as a dog, this little sadhu, the sadhu and the dog were both manifestations of the Dalai Lama's mind. So these Buddhas are bopping around the universe, facilitating things, making things happen. So that sadhu didn't have to be born out of a mother's womb, and nor did the dog. So they'd look like a sadhu, they'd look like a dog, and that little dog, you know, you'd go, oh, well, if it's the Buddha, you must be able to tell. Well, no, you can't tell. That Buddha's not sitting in the corner with a little halo saying, wink, wink, I'm the Dalai Lama. No, he might even be a mean, ugly dog. But if it is the Dalai Lama's mind, it looks like a dog, it eats like a dog, it'll die like a dog, but it's not a dog. It's the Buddha. So this is why they have a saying among Tibetans, you don't know who anybody is, so don't judge. I think this is really quite profound, you know. Look how idiotic we are. We judge everybody on the basis of what we think, you know, as if we know everything. So that dog, you wouldn't see it was the Dalai Lama, not a possibility. It would be exactly like a dog, you know, but it would not be a dog. It would be the Buddha manifesting as a dog. I find this very interesting. And of course, it fits with all the teachings. You have to study those teachings to see the logic of all this. Now, so that's how Buddhas manifest in millions of forms all the time. Ordinary forms, okay, to help sentient beings. Now, there's another form. Okay, those two kinds of forms, they're called the Nimanakaya, the first one. And there's the supreme Nimanakaya. Nimanakaya means emanation body. So the one behind me, the Shakyamuni Buddha, that's the supreme Nimanakaya. That's the manifestation of the Buddha mind at the time in India, and he's a founding Buddha. That's the supreme Nimanakaya. But that dog, the sadhu, they'd be the ordinary Nimanakayas. And even those we can't recognize, you know, they're manifesting to benefit sentient beings. The other one is called the enjoyment body. This is more subtle, and this is mainly related to Tantra. So in the Vajrayana, the main body of the Buddha, the main form of the Buddha in the Sutra teachings is the one behind me, Shakyamuni Buddha. Then in the Tantra, you've got the Sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body. And the main manifestation of that one is called Vajradhara. So under Vajradhara, you've got 5 Buddha families, Amitabha, Akshobhya, Nimana, these 5. And then under them are the hundreds and hundreds of other Buddhas. And basically, they're all just physical manifestations in light bodies representing different psychological qualities that we will then use to help us accomplish those qualities. So then all of these manifestations of Buddhas in these subtle light bodies, they also have an environment. We all have an environment. You don't just float in the sky. So all of these Buddhas have their own environment, and that's the meaning of a Pure Land. So they're all depicted in these round drawings, these mandalas, you know, they're all got particular qualities related to that Buddha. So mostly it's only high level beings who've got realizations who can be reborn in these subtle light bodies in these Pure Lands where you can get enlightened very quickly. So Rinpoche talks all the time in this book about Amitabha's Pure Land. For whatever reason, Amitabha's Pure Land, according to the teachings of Lama Zopa, that's accessible to ordinary people like you and me who don't have realizations. So I know when I first heard all these Buddhist teachings, and I'm thinking about being reborn as a human being, because you've got 2 options, really. Born as a human with access to spiritual teachings, or you're born as a Pure Land. And I thought, oh, boring old Pure Lands. I don't want that, you know. This is before I worked on this book. I want to be born a human again, you know, so I can go around and practice and blah, blah, blah. But then suddenly, since this book, I started to look into it and read Lama Zopa's teachings. Now I'm a real fan of Amitabha's Pure Land. Because the fact of the matter is you can go to this Pure Land and then you can get enlightened really quickly because you've got a light body, for God's sake. You don't need toilets and boyfriends and dramas. There's no overt evidence of delusions. You can whiz to enlightenment. Amitabha's Pure Land. So every time I go to sleep, I hit my iPad and I hear my own voice reciting this particular prayer as I go to sleep. So every night I go to bed and I'm making up my bed and I say to myself, one day closer to Amitabha's Pure Land. So I've decided I'm going to get reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. So I know this sounds hilarious. I know it's ridiculously, but when you start to realize that there's not a creator up there who's going to punish us or reward us. We create our own reality, people. So when we realize this, and it's just like, you know, like I said yesterday, you don't just say, oh, I'd love to go on a holiday. And then someone says, where would you like to go? Oh, whatever's best. I'm sorry, when it comes to that, you got to climb on an airplane. You can't go to a country called whatever's best. You got to choose. Is it Italy? Is it America? Is it Australia? You choose it and you buy your airplane ticket. Same here. You decide. Where do you want to get reborn? Male, female, human, Amitabha's Pure Land. You decide, baby. And of course, karma takes care. You'll be okay. So that's the Pure Lands. So any questions about that, please? No questions, that's fine. And I don't know what else.
I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a question. What is the prayer? The screen froze when
I'm
Venerable.
running out of words.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I got a cough. It's just a sec. Trouble is I drink and talk at the same time, so I'm always choking myself. Yes, Brian, talk to me, sweetheart.
So I've heard that there's many.
I can't hear you, darling.
Can you hear me?
I don't know why, but you look like you're unmuted, but I can't hear you.
Nothing.
Or maybe it's me. It's me, I think. Go on, talk again.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, there you go. It was my button. Yeah, go.
I think there's another question from Mary as well.
Oh yeah, good. Okay, Mary, talk to me. Well, go, Brian. You talk.
So I heard there's like many Pure Lands, and then when we do the six.
That's right. As many Buddhas as there are, all these different Buddhas, they each got their own environment where they manifest. Yes, exactly.
So if we're unenlightened, of course, or are not a great practitioner, we should always be going for Amitabha. But
well, only because Lama Zopa says in the teachings, and Tsongkhapa talks about this too, that that's apparently accessible to ordinary people without high realization. So it's not an impossible for ordinary people, not those with high realization. You don't need to have high realization. Most of the Pure Lands, you've got to have realized emptiness, have high level realizations of bodhicitta, whatever. But apparently not Amitabhas. That's all I can do on Zopa's teachings and quote Tsongkhapa. Okay.
Okay, yeah, it just in the 6th session Guru Yoga, it says like, may I be born in Shambhala. So
I know, of course it says all these things. Now that must be because you're doing Kala Chakra, right? You must be doing the Kala Chakra 6th session Guru Yoga, because that says that, doesn't it? Shambhala.
Yeah.
That's from Kala Chakra. That's why you do it, because it's Kala Chakra.
Okay.
Relationship with Shambhala. That's, of course, if you got, I mean, every deity own Pure Land, and obviously you will say you want to be reborn in that deity's Pure Land. There's no contradiction, but you know, you can also make aspirations to want to be in Amitabha's Pure Land. It's up to you. Do you understand, darling? He suddenly went away. Do you understand what I'm saying, Brian?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Good, darling. Thank you. Yes, Hillary, talk to me.
Venerable, there is a question on chat from Maria. And she asks, what is the prayer that you said just a few minutes ago? You said your screen was frozen and she didn't hear it. It's a prayer that you play when you're going to sleep.
That's right. Yes, that's right. It's in this book and it's called It's in Lama Zopa's book. If you have the book, you can get it there. I can before I go, and I can give it to you as a PDF. This prayer. It's about 30 verses. It takes about 10 minutes to recite it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else, darlings? Anybody else? Mary, that was it. That was it for the questions in the chat box, was it? Okay. Are there any other questions? Any kind of questions? It's helpful. Yes, Vicky.
Thank you, Venerable. So should we be thinking of Amitabha's Pure Land as empty?
Vicky, why do you ask that as if there was something that weren't empty? I mean, there's nothing that exists that's not empty, darling. So why do you ask that? There's an assumption that it isn't empty? Or, I mean, this really begs the question of what you think emptiness means. It's a big minefield now, Vicky. So what are you talking about?
It is a big minefield when I think of emptiness. I'm not really, I think Amitabha's Pure Land would be also empty.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether it's appropriate to talk about emptiness here, but the fact of the matter is,
okay,
it's okay, Vicky. Buddhist teachings, we all know if we're studying properly and trying to practice properly, everything leads us to, from the wisdom point of view, to this realization that Buddha's making, that every single thing in the universe, including the self and Amitabha's Pure Land and a Buddha and the hell realms and the dog realms and the murderer and the rapist and the apple, whatever exists, and the mind feeling it. Everything is a dependent.
Okay.
Vicky, you can turn off your thing. Unmute. Mute yourself. That's right. Yeah. So then, okay, we'll just talk about it for a minute, Vicky. Thank you for bringing it up. So the Buddha's deal is, okay, start before. The Buddha's deal from the beginning to the end is that we all suffer. Sentient beings suffer. Sentient beings keep being reborn up and down like a yo-yo in the suffering realms and the happy realms and the suffering realms. We all get reborn and reborn because we are not in touch with reality. Represents us in stages of development according to our capacity, different levels of reality. Grasping at everything as being unchanging. You grasp at yourself as being permanent. You grasp at the happiness as permanent. You grasp at the suffering as permanent. And this is one of the major reasons you suffer. So the very first level, entry level, junior school, grade 1 level of reality, start becoming familiar with impermanence. And so the level of impermanence we're discussing it is start realizing, honey child, you're going to die. It's a wake-up call to not waste your precious life. That's the first level of reality. We're all impermanent. Whereas la land, ego, thinks, no, nothing changes, everything's blah, blah, blah. So we can see the suffering we experience when we bump into this reality. That's the first level of reality. The next level of reality would be talking about Buddha's view about karma. He says we either think that we're created by somebody else. He disagrees with that. He says that's a mistake. He's not being rude. Or he says we think our mummy and daddy made us. He says that's a mistake. They didn't. Or we think our mind is not physical. Or we think there's no cause and effect, which is suffer, meaning we blame everybody else and we think we're an innocent victim. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. That minefield of wrong views, a minefield of misconceptions. So he talks about cause and effect and how our consciousness is not physical and how we create our own reality. This is a huge, to the extent to which we're not in touch with that, he says, is, and then he delusions and says these delusions, how they completely make up nonsense. Attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the boyfriend, anger exaggerates the deliciousness of the ex-boyfriend, and we live in la land because of this. All the way through our Buddhist practice, step by step by step, one way of saying the one thing that we're doing is stripping away the nonsense in our mind, stripping away the delusions in our mind, and bringing ourselves closer and closer and closer to being in sync with reality. And why would we want to do this? Because guess what, honey child, you don't want to suffer. Finally, when we do all this work, now we get to the subtlest level of reality, which is implied by all of everything I've said, which is that finally nothing has an intrinsic nature. Finally, everything that exists is existing independently. And then we realize so-called emptiness, that nothing has an intrinsic nature. And then we're out of samsara finally. So that's the answer, Vicky. Is that clear? Vicky. Answer. Is that clear?
Oh, yes, it broke up for a minute. Yes, thank you, Venerable.
It all leads to that view. That's the subtlest view of reality. So yes, conclusion, everything that exists, whatever it might be, is necessarily lacking an intrinsic nature. Everything that we do that causes us suffering is because we have this implicit view that everything has an intrinsic nature. We don't think we think this because it's a really subtle level, but by the view of no cause and effect, stripping away this view of being an innocent victim, slowly we prepare our minds to realize whatever exists in Pure Lands, in whatever by definition has no intrinsic nature. Whatever exists by definition is a dependent arising. So that's the long answer, Vicky. Thank you so much. Yes, Brian.
Yeah, so yesterday you were talking about gross and subtle consciousnesses and subtle and gross bodies. And I was just wondering how they relate in our everyday experience. Like when we experience something through the eye consciousness, how does that relate to our subtle body and our gross body?
Okay, so really, the simpler way, first of all, the simplest way of putting it is the gross consciousness is the sensory consciousnesses, and we can see very logically they're inextricably linked and dependent upon a decent working eyeball, nervous system, tongue, etc., etc. That's pretty clear, isn't it? So that's the interdependence of the gross consciousness and gross body. level. But clearly, we also have feelings and thoughts and emotions, and we do access those in gross body, but we access at a very grosser level of them because in their nature, subtle consciousness. So at the time of death, and including when you go to sleep, it's clear, Brian, when you go to sleep, your senses have temporary your mental states, which is all your mental states, and that's how you experience dreams, because you're no longer in the usual one of the brain and the time of death. When the sensory consciousness ceases and the gross body, mental consciousness is now existing, and that is, in the Vajrayana model of the way we're made up. Here I am. Can you see me and hear me, Mary?
Yes, we can see and hear you, Venerable.
Okay, good. So Brian's question. So there's clearly a relationship, Brian, because it's all your mind. It's a question of whether we have access to our subtle mind, So it's only really when you've got single point of concentration that you can consciously access your subtler level of mind. And that level of mind is capable of clairvoyance, can see the past, can see the future, etc., etc., etc. But everything we do at the grosser level affects our mind at a subtler level. Of course it does. It can't not do that. But we're not conscious of it, I would say. That's the really way to put it. Does that make sense, Brian? And do you have a question from that?
No, that makes perfect sense. But I guess when we ordinarily meditate, and if we don't have single point of concentration, we're not accessing subtle mind when we meditate.
No, of course not. Of course not. The only time we do is when we dream, but we can see we have no control. We're all over the place. There's no control whatsoever. So when you really have got single point of concentration, and especially when you practice Tantra, the great yogis can, like they would never sleep. So Lama Yeshe, for example, had complete control over his mind, and he would never sleep. He had a bad heart, and so in the afternoons he would look like he would go to sleep, but he would just go to he would access his subtle mind and then do all his intense practice and power. And I mean, the great yogis don't actually sleep. In other words, they don't become unconscious. They can access their subtle mind at will, and because it's super more powerful, they can use it to meditate and get realizations. That's what we'd like to do eventually. You understand?
Yes, thank you so much.
Good. Yeah. Anybody else? Questions, people? Anyone else?
Venerable, there's another question in chat.
Good. Go on then.
From someone named D.
Yes, D.
So my mom died on the 31st of October, and I often wake up at 5 a.m. with her presence and her appearance in my mind. The feeling of her is very different every time. Does it need anything at all? I do Shitro as much as possible. Is there anything else I can do?
I don't know what Shitro is. Obviously some practice, and I don't know what that is, unfortunately. But first of all, it's because of the karmic connection, I would say, that with your mother, that she manifests, especially in the mornings when your mind is very sensitive and you come out of sleep and your subtle mind is more vivid. It's just because you've got this strong karmic connection with your mother, I would suggest. Many people, I mean, this is not what you're saying, and I don't think so, but a lot of people talk about how they feel their presence of their mother, that kind of thing. Well, that's an interesting point, because technically, from the Buddhist perspective, once your mother's died, she's taken October the 31st is not yet it's not set 7 weeks, is it? It's not yet 7 weeks. No, it's not quite. No, it could be more. It is more than 7 weeks. No, it's not 7 weeks yet. But what's interesting, Lama Zopa says that once the second your mother left the body and she entered into the bardo, she has no memory of her past life. Different people say different things. So then technically you could argue your mother's in a subtle state, but she wouldn't be hanging around you because she has no memory of who you are or anything. She's moving on to the next life. So then the other option for some people could be that your mother's being reborn as a spirit. I mean, we don't want to think that. And that spirit could be hanging around you, That's not an uncommon thing, but I'm not saying your mother has been born a spirit. But that if it is your actual mother's presence, then technically it could be because if she's born in a human realm already, she wouldn't be appearing to you in another form. So it's mainly probably, I would suggest, your mind. But nevertheless, it's an opportunity always to do prayers for your mother, especially if it's not fully yet if she's not out of the bardo yet, to do many, many prayers for your mother as much as you possibly can. That's marvelous, If there's anything from that you want to get clear from the little bit that I know, please ask me. Anybody else there? Anybody else got questions? Olive has a question. Yes, Olive.
I was just wondering if when we do practice, we should be practicing for the goal of achieving enlightenment in this lifetime, or if we should be practicing for the goal of having, a fortunate rebirth and good conditions for continuing our practice over multiple lifetimes.
Olive, darling, exactly. There's nothing wrong with saying the words. And we say that in many of the prayers, especially in your tantric practices. It's all about, may I become a Buddha in this life. And you want to do that. Of course, there's nothing wrong aspiring for the best in the universe. But then on the reality, if you did an assessment of where you're at and you had clairvoyance and you could see your karma, you might know that it mightn't be for 42 lives you get enlightened. But there's nothing wrong with aspiring, sweetheart. And equally, there's nothing wrong with aspiring for the very best human birth, and there's nothing wrong with aspiring for a Pure Land rebirth either. Nothing wrong with those aspirations. They're very powerful. So then due to the karma at the time of your death, regardless of your aspirations, the karma will take care and you'll get whatever the karma is, So nothing wrong with any of that. Nothing wrong at all. It's marvelous. Based upon this powerful compassion. It's excellent to have that thought. Of course it is.
Okay, so we should work toward, I just wanted to clarify that we should try and work towards achieving Buddhahood, but then I guess not anticipated happening in one lifetime.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, if someone looked at this moment at your mind and knew your karma perfectly, they could deduce where you were at. And if you could see it exactly, you could deduce where you're at as well. And if you did indeed have the karma to be born in, to be reborn in this, to be get enlightened in this life, you'd see it. You'd know. But even though it might not be that, there's still nothing wrong with aspiring for that, sweetheart. And of course not. Of course, it's perfect. Nothing wrong. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Okay. Who else? Questions, people? I mean, we've covered everything a little bit. I mean, of course, it needs much more, but that's why I highly recommend you get this book. Really, it's just such a good handbook. It's got so much information. And even if it's just you're not a Buddhist, it might be just one tiny thing, even that help your dog, to help your mummy. There's lots of advice in there that you can adjust to your own ways of seeing the world. It doesn't follow you have to be a Tibetan Buddhist. Are there any other questions, sweethearts? There's this question just there. I saw it go away as a question there in the chat. What happened?
Venerable Robina, there is a question. Can you speak more about these spirits? What do you think this person's asking about your experience when the spirit came to you when you were in England. What do you think came to you and how did you not die?
Yeah, okay, so this is the Buddhist. We've got to have an understanding a little bit of the Buddhist view of the different realms of existence. So like I mentioned before, yesterday, I think was a rough way of talking about the six different realms of existence within what Buddha calls the desire realm, which is the realm mainly driven by intense attachment. And this is all ancient history, it's like, so there's different realms, and they're all on a spectrum from incredible joy, the fruit of virtue, the God realms, to the human realm, which is also the fruit of virtue, to get a human body. But it's considered, even though it's not as intensely delicious as the God realms, it's a preferable rebirth because you've got access to intelligence and can work on your mind and develop a spiritual practice. If you're in the God realms, you don't practice any spiritual practice. Why would you? You're just blissing out, So then you've got the three lower realms they refer to. And this is in the context of the Buddha's analysis of the mind. And he talks about, we've got thousands of neurotic states of mind, but they're all kind of rooted in the three poisons. It's a very clear model of the mind in Buddhism. The three toxic emotions. So the root delusion, such that when you've, as we discussed with Vicky, when you finally realize reality, when you cut the root of all delusions, that's when you're completely out of samsara, you're out of all these rebirths. But here, the root delusion, which is this known as ignorance, and as the primordial level of this ignorance is this intense fear-based, I-based sense of a separate, concrete, real, definite, intrinsic me, so deep in our bones that we don't even articulate it because it's so subtle. And this, for the Buddha, is the cause of all suffering in all universes since beginningless time. On the basis of that, so one of the functions of that ignorance, that specific ignorance, is a very gross level of ignorance. So one of the three lower realms, known as the animal realm, and we can see that's it's super populated. I mean, you might have 7 billion mosquitoes in one evening in a hot, steamy place. I mean, it's clearly more than humans. Humans is a miniature percentage of all humans. Humans are a miniature percentage of all sentient beings. So the animal realm is one level of reality, and it's intensely suffering insofar as the mind is very limited, a kind of really intense level of incredible ignorance, incredible ego grasping, which is rooted in fear, and intensely more strong attachment, intensely more strong delusions than any human possible, if we can try and conceptualize that. So the root ignorance, so this is a manifestation of predominance of ignorance, of negative behavior, would be to be reborn as an animal. So like, you know, and you've got to really think about this, because we don't think of animals like this in our culture. It's a completely different view, and it sounds very heavy to us, like you're criticizing animals. But I mean, I mentioned this, and this is very shocking for us to hear. Lama Zopa said at one point, if you could just for a moment have a direct experience of the mind of your little dog, the mental suffering, and this is something we do not consider. It's not the view in our psychology at all. This is a Buddhist psychological model. The mental suffering of that intense fear, intense deluded mind would be so unbearable. It's so shocking to you. You'd never want to waste another millisecond of this precious human life. Second, so that's the animal realm. And you can see there's a whole spectrum of them, from the lions and the tigers down to the tiny miniature bugs, you know, and even down to the billions and billions and billions of beings live in the depths of darkness and the depths of the ocean. This is something interesting. In the Buddhist texts, they talk about the grossest suffering of the animal realm is literally the depth of darkness, of primordial ignorance of all these beings in the depth of the ocean piled on top of each other in complete and primordial ignorance. And I remember reading like 30 years ago in the science pages of the New York Times about how we are now discovering in the depths of the ocean, in total darkness where we thought there could be no life, billions of species of beings piled high on top of each other. And in fact, the Buddhist view, this planet that we occupy, there's not a millimeter of space where you won't find sentient beings. And we're talking about, these are the animal realm, the ones whose minds are conjoined with some kind of physical matter, like the 4 elements. So this is the depth of the ignorance of the animal realm. And then you've got kind of the elephants and the giraffes and the birds. They're like in the God realms of the animal realm, you know, the ones we can see. But in general, it's an intensely suffering rebirth, and one that you wouldn't want. You know, then you've got the spirit realm, which is a predominance of the second delusion, the second 3 of these 3 delusions, which is attachment. This is, I mean, you know, this is multifaceted. It's the main voice of ego grasping, this primordial, deep, frantic, emotional hunger, frantic grasping, in primordially deep in every sentient being. That is the main voice of this ego grasping. And it's this primordial attachment of dissatisfaction, always wanting something more, never satisfied. And I mean, the way Buddhist psychology describes this at deeper levels, it sort of sounds shocking to us in our culture. We don't talk like this, you know? And this is the predominance of attachment karma, is you're born as a spirit. And spirit realm, again, is so, this can be most powerful spirits who they say can really, you know, like, can be super powerful, super harmful, really heavy duty negative beings, to just simple like hungry ghosts, you know, or to like the ones who can possess humans and animals. We hear lots about these types of experiences, people hearing voices, spirits, all the time. We hear a lot about this. This is all the occupants of this particular other second realm, the second of the 3 lower realms, even more occupied than the animal realm, and it's all the fruit of predominance of attachment energy. And then you got the worst of the suffering, which is called the hell realms, and it's plural. I mean, I find it very fascinating, you know, that all over the world, humans in all the different cultures all over history have all come up with similar findings, have observed similar things. I find that can't just be denied. You know, I mean, the arrogant materialist philosophical view people just think all these idiot religions who think there are other beings besides what you can see with your eyes are all just fantasists. I mean, that's so arrogant. It's been over for centuries people have been coming up with these findings, you know. So they've all got different views about it. And all I can do here is tell you the Buddhist view. You know, all I can do is tell you what I've learned. All I can do is tell you that. I can't say more. I can't do more. So these hell realms, This is a predominance of anger energy. So when you understand these realms of existence and this Buddhist view of the way we're all constructed of the 4 elements. All matter, according to the model of the universe, the Vajrayana model, matter consists of the 4 elements. That's it. And minds, there are billions and trillions and trillions and billions of countless minds. And all minds are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. And so this is the subtle, we were talking before today, Brian, we've got subtle mind, and our subtle mind is our mental states. And they are all inextricably linked to these different wind energies coursing through these 72,000 subtle channels in our body. And everything our mind does programs the mind in those habits, and those minds then impact upon those wind energies. And the negative states of mind produce physical suffering now and in the future, physical types of bodies. So like a lion's body, a dog body, a human body, a spirit body, an animal body, a hell-being body. They're all the different configurations of the 4 elements conjoined with the minds of those beings. They're not punishment, not reward. No one made this up. No one created all this. It's the observation of these beings, you know. So the hell realms is the most intense suffering, the most intense mental suffering. And then those minds conjoin with, this seems to be like with the fire element. These spirits conjoin with air element. Humans and animals, we share the planet. Look at us, you know. We certainly haven't got light bodies. And the God realms, just with subtle light bodies. So all these different types of sentient beings, all in samsara, quote unquote. So spirits, lots and lots and lots of them, also, you know, share this human realm with us. I mean, they're not in the human realm, they're in the spirit realm, but we've got strong karmic connections. So let's say, you know, me and my hubby have endless fights and arguments and shout and yell, and then one day I drop dead. Well, I'm going to get born as a spirit due to my negative karma, but because of my intense karma with my husband, I'll possess him. I'll literally possess him, you know, harm him. That's due to a past attachment, and so powerful. So many creatures are harmed by other spirits. This is really not uncommon for the Tibetan Buddhist analysis and the Buddhist view of the universe, you know. Strong karmic connection. You can get harmed by spirits. You can see, many people can see them and hear them, get harmed by them. I mean, so many stories, you know. And it's due to attachment. Much of it, spirit one, is due to attachment. So there's always a story I tell. One of our marvelous lamas, who was a great yogi who passed away 20 years ago, Geshe Lama Kontrog, an amazing yogi meditator up in the mountains. And I was working on his biography for a while. And anyway, I'll go back to it eventually. So he was this whole amazing yogi, lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land, Lama Zopa said. He lived way up in the mountains in his cave, naked for years. One of these caves that used to be where Milarepa used to meditate in the 11th century. Naked. He had complete control over his elements, complete control over his mind, and he didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't need any of this, because he had, his mind was so subtle, his mind was so powerful, he was able to live on the subtle energy of the air. There's a type of medicine that Tibetan doctors make for the great meditators, and it's called chulen, taking the essence. So these great meditators can live on these pills. The Tibetan doctors get the essence of all the minerals, and then they live on these pills, and while they're meditating, and they don't need to bother with kitchens and food and toilets. They can meditate day and night. But this Lama was so powerful, he lived on what they called wind chulen. He was able to take the essence from the air. He didn't need food for years, didn't need sleep. He ate the air. Geshe Lama Kontrog, amazing yogi. So of course, being an amazing yogi, realizations of emptiness, bodhicitta, blah, blah, blah. And of course he had clairvoyance. There's no big deal, you know. Clairvoyance is something so typical and so normal. And this has been around for 3,000 years. And these Indians, you know, getting it from single point of concentration. You access these subtle levels of your mind. You can see the past, you see the future, you see the minds of others. I mean, Buddha would say you can't really begin to benefit people until you've got clairvoyance. Clear, crystal clear, seeing past and future. I mean, this is, again, like science fiction for us. So anyway, he was up in the mountains one time, and one of the things he could do, like all these great yogis, when they've completely controlled their inner elements and their inner mind, they can control the external elements. This is nothing special. So, you know, he'd be up in his cave, and when he started to make contact with the local villagers, they'd tramp up for 2 hours to his cave. Oh, Geshe-la, we need rain. When do you need it? How many days? Okay, and he'd book it in, and sure enough, he'd manipulate the weather, and the rain would come and the rain would stop. These dudes can do this, you know. Anyway, one story about spirits. He was up in his cave one day, and there was another cave. He was up like 12 hours away from the local village. And also these great yogis, because they can control their speech, they can control their mind and their wind energies completely. They can fly in the sky, they can walk on the air, you know. I mean, all these stories you hear about, it's all explained in this Vajrayana system, how that's possible. Anyway, he was up in this village, in this cave, and all the poor nuns tracked from his nunnery. There were a bunch of nuns. They traipsed up and to Geshe Lama Kontrog and saying, Annie Tenzin, Annie is the term they use for nun. Annie Tenzin's gone crazy. Annie Tenzin's gone crazy. He said, don't worry, I'll fix it. So he ran down the mountain. He's able to run on the air. So he got down there in a quarter of the time. And as he's coming into the nun's room with the other nuns with her, she's in the bed and she's got this very deep voice. Annie Tenzin's kind of out of control. Basically, she's possessed by a local villager who died recently. And what's happening is, because the villager who died, and because of his, and this is the story, Geshe Lama comes in and he knows exactly what to do. He can see, he's clairvoyant. And he said, and the spirits who run around possessing animals, possessing humans, they're driven by this incredibly powerful attachment. I mean, attachment like you can't imagine. And they're just driven from pillar to post out of their brains, so unhappy, craving things. So this villager, so Geshe Lama says, because he knows the spirit is in this nun, because the nun has got something that belongs to him. So Geshe Lama says to the spirit, what do you want? And he can see it's the villager. He can see his mind. And the villager says, I want my pink thermos with the white flowers. I want my pink thermos with the white flowers. Sure enough, there it was on the nun's table. This villager, the nuns remembered that this villager had given this nun a thermos of tea. And these poor villagers are totally poor. They've got nothing. And she'd forgot to give the thermos back. So he's annoyed and upset and resentful and possessing and all attached to his thermos. And he dies with attachment to his thermos. I mean, this is, for me, such a telling story. You've got to give up attachment, people, you know. I mean, look at us. We talk about a thermos. We hoard about 4 million possessions. God Almighty. So anyway, because Geshe Lama can see who it is and knows the cause and the problems, what they do is, and I've heard many stories like this, they got to cut the connection between that and the object. So, you know, in this case, they get the object and they give it away and they sort of loosen the connection. But another story, before I finish this story, another story in Courtin Monastery. One woman at one of the November courses, one of the courses, the Lam Rim courses, she was lost the plot and they went to Geshe Lama Kontrog. And he said, oh, the same Lama, he was at Courtin at that point. He said, oh, she's possessed, but, you know, she's got a possession belonging to the spirit who is possessing her. So they found this Jewish object in her bag. And she said it was a gift from her father that he had bought in an antique store. So I always think twice of getting antiques now, because you get the bloody spirit who used to own it. So anyway, they had to chuck the object away. He didn't know this particular person. There was no karmic connection. So they throw the object away as far as possible, which breaks the connection. And this sounds very hilarious, but I've seen many examples of this. They've got to make the spirit leave. And sometimes they beat the person. So this poor girl is being beaten by this Lama who's shouting at the spirit in Tibetan. We know, you know, there's nothing for you to hear anymore. You go, you know. But Lama Zopa would use very peaceful methods. He was always renowned. He would use peaceful methods. One person in Singapore who was possessed, Rinpoche spent hours and hours, because they're there because of attachment. And this attachment is like worse than the worst vampire's attachment you could imagine. And they've got to try and sort of seduce the person to leave, you know, So this woman, finally, Rinpoche offered the spirit a cup of tea. And the spirit happily accepted the tea, and then they agreed they'd leave the woman. I mean, it sounds very funny, doesn't it? So this spirit in Courtin, he had to whack the poor girl, you know, and the spirit then left. But with this spirit in the nun, he knew who the spirit was. And it was so kind of poignant, really, because this spirit, that once you become born as a spirit, your mind conjoined with air energy, you've got no control. I mean, look at us. We're pathetic. We have got no control. And we've got intelligence. We just get driven from pillar to post, to cake, to handbag, to boy, to this, to that. We're demented with attachment. Can you imagine spirits, their personification of attachment? The suffering is unbearable, like a nightmare. And this is a gross level of suffering. So this spirit was in tears in this nun's body. I can't find my way. I can't find my way, because you're just driven by attachment. So Geshe-la, having power, was able to help the spirit leave and get a nice human birth, you know. So there's some stories about spirits, all right? Hope it answers your question. Any more questions? Or I freaked you all out. There's so many stories I can tell you about spirits. They're hilarious, I tell you. One woman from Kathmandu, she was Tibetan. She was possessed, but she didn't realize, because you don't know, you just think it's your own mind, you know. And one time she went to visit some Lama in another country, in Europe, and she came back so upset. She said, Robina, that Lama, he beat me with a shoe, because the Lama could see she was possessed, but the spirit didn't leave, you know. Sometimes the spirit harm can be so heavy, the karma between the people, so the spirit and the person, that no matter what the lamas do, the spirit doesn't go. So you just have to live with them, you know. But I mean, there are endless stories. Some of you people, I guarantee you've got stories or experiences about this. People hear voices, people have them in their dreams. I remember one girl in Puerto Rico, it was almost like she was seduced by it, because all these nice spirits would show they liked her and they'd come visit her, and then they started to attack her and rape her because she was making this connection. She was all sentimental about it, you know. There's so many stories you hear. Of course, the materialist view thinks you're insane talking this way. This is the Buddhist view. Any more questions before we go home? We should end on a happy note, I think. Yes, Olive.
I have a question. Yes.
Oh,
Just
hey,
yeah, I have a question.
Good job.
Yeah. Is it my turn?
I don't know. You talk to me. No one else got their hand up, I think.
Sorry. I was wondering if then, like, from what you're saying about spirits and possession, if there's anything you can do to help people who have, like, you know, for instance, been diagnosed with, you know, schizophrenia, which is understood to be a mental condition, but then, you know,
of course there is. Of course there's lots of things. Of course there's lots of things you can do, darling. But you have to know them. It's like you're asking me, are there lots of things you can do to help a person with cancer? You've got to be a doctor. Yeah, of course. Of course there are lots of things to do. But you've got to know what you're doing and know what their diagnosis is and know what the methods are. Of course there are, darling. But often if you don't know the answer, you'd send them to somebody who does know the answer.
Because
you can consult lamas. Pardon?
Yeah, I was going to say, wouldn't the view be that they're actually, the mental illness is not correct, that they are actually experiencing?
It doesn't follow.
Spirit?
It doesn't follow. It can be simply their own mind, or it could be spirits,
right?
Of course.
Okay.
But that's where you have to have the knowledge to know that, darling. I mean, most of us aren't clairvoyants. That's where you've got to consult lamas and consult people who do know what they're talking about. This is very common, darling, to talk. So, and often it can be the person's mind. There's no question. We can be completely crazy, you know, our own mind, or we can be possessed. Depends. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just heard it the other way. Schizophrenia is always possession. So yeah, I didn't know.
No,
that
darling, no, it doesn't follow
it could also be.
Doesn't follow, darling. No, it doesn't follow at all.
That makes more sense.
Yeah. Yes, Vanessa, sweetheart. Hello, happy to see you, darling. Talk to me, Vanessa.
Hi, good to see you. I'm just going to
darling.
My camera off because I'm embarrassed to ask this question.
No problem, darling. Don't worry.
Okay. So learning Buddhism, studying Buddhism, it really helped me overcome my attachment to specific people.
Yes.
But I just seem to notice now I have another attachment, which I think is probably better. I'm just really obsessed with like money and just
I understand, darling.
And,
I mean, attachment is limitless, Vanessa, and we keep changing the object. That's all. So the key thing is to be not so much conscious of the object, but just see how this. We know we've discussed this often enough, you know, in classes that you come to. This primordial emotional hunger in us. It's always there to one degree or another, and always it's going to grab onto an object. One day it can be people, then it can be money, then it can be this, and then it can be that. I mean, this is the exact example that you're giving, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question from that is, what's your question?
It's kind of, sometimes it compromises my kind of practice with studying Buddhism, because it's like I can be reading a book or, you know, watching teaching, but instead I'm on the computer just looking at all this financial stuff.
I understand, darling.
Yeah.
I know. Well, the thing to do for you, Vanessa, the same, all you got to do, honey, we've all got these attachments until we're quite advanced. All you got to remember is stop in your tracks and think, well, you know, let me do this and let me work out my money and let me do investments. Why, Vanessa? Because I want to become a better human being and I want to help people. As soon as you say that, darling, it loosens the attachment and it makes it more broad, and it can make it a beneficial activity, and it loosens the grip of the attachment. That's why every time you eat the food, before you shove it in the mouth, you think of offering it, you see it as blessed. You know, every time you try to attach to a person, you think you've tried to benefit them. So you add bodhicitta and kindness into the mix, and that will loosen the grip of the neurotic part of it. That's very wise stuff. You can't just chuck the baby out with the bathwater. We're not advanced enough to give up all our attachments. So you just add in bodhicitta and kindness. It's not complicated, Vanessa. You just have to add it in there, and that makes it, then don't do it. Then just don't be guilty. Just keep looking at it and think, well, how marvelous. I'm happy to have money. I want to have money so I can be useful to people. And then make sure when you do have your money, you have a line item in your budget called generosity, Vanessa. And then it makes it worthwhile, darling.
Okay. Thank you so much.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. Yeah.
Very skillful.
Like a bodhisattva kind of.
That's right, darling. You don't have to be extreme and give it all up. Just add bodhicitta to the mix, and then suddenly your mind will feel better. And you use your skills to do this and make some money. Nothing wrong. I mean, the world needs money, and you can use it for so much good. You know, it's a marvelous thing to do.
Great. Thank you so much.
Good. And then you're gonna aspire to be like Jeff Bezos's wife. What's her name? Mackenzie, what's her name? She got like $56 billion and she's giving it away so fast, people are shocked. So you can aspire to be like her, okay? Or like what's his name? Steve Jobs' wife, who's multi-billionaire because of him, or you can give it away the other one who's divorced. Bill Gates's wife. All these ex-wives are doing amazing jobs, being generous philanthropists. So you can use them as your example, Vanessa, and become a rich philanthropist like those amazing women, okay? Vanessa?
Yes, got it.
Good idea. Yeah, okay.
Great idea.
Yes, Sarah. Sarah, darling. Yes, talk to me. Sarah's got a hand up. Where's Sarah gone?
You need to unmute Sarah. Thank you.
We're running out of time, so I'd like to go
No worry,
back
darling. You talk to me, sweetheart. Don't you worry. Go on.
Okay. Amitabha's Pure Land. What are your recommendations? If we want to follow that path right now, what should we be doing in order
living in your vows, practicing morality every day? Don't steal, don't kill, don't lie. Do lots of practices. Be virtuous, be generous, be kind, and say the prayer every day, and then die with a happy mind.
Okay, thank you.
That's it. Okay, Sarah. Who else? Come on, darlings, before we finish. What time is it? It's 2:45. Yeah, we can finish any time. Go on. This is, I mean, anyway, so I think we've covered quite a bit. I think we've covered probably as much as I can cover. All the facts and figures are in the book. All the practices are there, but you can look into those yourself. Yes, Christine, my dear, talk to me. Happy to see you, darling.
Thank you. I'm at a silent meditation on a break.
Yeah,
Just
good.
wanted to ask you real quick off topic. What has been your favorite moment being a Buddhist nun, and what do you enjoy teaching the most?
I can't answer that as simple as that, darling. My favorite moments are when my mind is less neurotic and I'm more relaxed and easygoing. And I like to teach all the Buddhist path, whatever I know, the little bit that I do know, you can tell I've got enthusiasm. So I like to do all of it. But I do like to talk about karma, and I like to talk about the mind, and I like to talk about emptiness. I find it hard to talk about compassion because I don't think I've got much. And I just have to quote Lama Zopa, you know. So I can't say too much about that. I can't rave on about compassion. But I can rave on about emptiness, I can rave on about karma, and I can rave on about the delusions. Okay? Will that do, Christine?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Venerable. Have a wonderful day.
So what about this? We will offer, I know there was something else I thought, there was another question in there, wasn't there, Mary? In the chat box, no? Mary? No, that's it.
No more questions, Venerable.
Okay,
No more.
Well, let's finish. We can finish, you darling people. So just keep moving, keep practicing, keep not giving up, be brave. Know we have amazing potential. Don't be nervous about the hell realms and all the rest. Just know that, like the person yesterday, and we can be nervous, but don't be nervous. Use it as a wake-up call. Think how ridiculous. Who would want to be born like that? So what am I going to do? Live in my vows. Be practical. Purify every day and rejoice in my amazing good qualities. We often forget to see our good qualities. Remember your good qualities, and they'll give you courage to never give up, never give up, never give up, never give up. And then you can help your dogs and the fleas and the ants and the cats as well. Okay. Come on then. Where's our little prayer? So we just think of offering a mandala, all the objects of the universe, as a thank you to the Buddha for all these teachings, okay? As if the Buddha gave them himself.
So Venerable, I just wanted to say thank you so much for teaching for TNL. And thank
Who's
you.
that?
Oh, this is Shankar, of course.
Oh, I can't see you.
Oh, I don't know if it
I've
should be
got-
of
all I can
course
see
or
is the
not.
prayer. Okay, I thought you're back from your retreat. I'm very happy, Shankar.
Thank you. Yes.
Good.
But I wanted to thank you for teaching for us, and please continue to teach for us and all of us, your students. Even when you're in Italy and various other places, please come back and continue.
I will, I promise. I will, I promise, Shankar. As long as I've got a mouth, I'll open it. But hopefully say a few wise words. I will. I will. Thank you, Shankar. Thank you so kind. Thank you so much. Okay.
Okay. Saji Bhagi Jokshin Medok Dramri Rab Lingji Ni Degan Padi Sangye Jino Mikte Uwargi Joku Namada Jing La Chopa Sho. May my venerable Lama's life be firm, her white divine actions spread in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Lozang always remain dispelling the darkness of all beings in the three realms.
Thank you so much, Shankar. Wonderful. Okay, darling. So let's do the three dedication prayer. We say, just think these thoughts. Do you, as a result of these virtuous karmic seeds, I'm saying it in longer words, okay? As a result of these virtuous karmic seeds that we planted in our mind from merely listening to these teachings, be so happy. May I quickly attain the state of a Buddha, just like my guru, and lead every single living being without exception to that enlightened state. I mean, what a marvelous dedication to have. The next one. And then think. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, this amazing aspiration to only want to benefit others, that has not arisen in all the minds of beings, may it arise and may it grow, and that which has arisen in the minds of beings, may it never diminish, but increase more and more and more. That's it. Enough. And all the holy lamas, Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, our precious Lama Zopa Rinpoche, may all our precious lamas live long, long, long lives, and we don't have to worry with mine. Leave it. Please take the picture off. Take it off. Thank you so much. May our precious lamas live long, because these teachings I'm saying to you out of my big fat mouth have come from them, okay? It's a living lineage that actually you can track back. This should give us confidence. I got this from my lamas, Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa, Lama Yesh, all my holy lamas. They got it from their lamas. And then it went right back to Padmasambhava in the 8th century, and he flew across the sky from India, and he got it from his lamas, and they got it right back to the Buddha. There's this living, unbroken, living lineage of teaching. So the power of it is sourcing right back to the Buddha. So be very happy. Thank you, darling people. Thank you so much, everybody. Much love. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everybody. Much love, everybody. Never give up, never give up, never give up. Goodbye.